Iran's currency collapse triggers mass protests. From economic collapse to street anger. A nationwide protest ignited by currency breakdown. In late 2025, Tehran appeared to be entering an ordinary winter. Yet beneath the surface, the economy was quietly approaching a breaking point. Throughout the year, Iran faced an unprecedented economic crisis. International sanctions, volatile oil prices, and internal mismanagement combined into a perfect storm that severely damaged everyday life. According to data from the International Monetary Fund, IMF, Iran's economy contracted by about 1.7% in 2025 and is expected to shrink another 2.8% in 2026. The national currency, the Iranian rial, continued to collapse. At the beginning of the year, the free market exchange rate was roughly 820,000 rials per US dollar. By late December, it had surged to around 1.42 million rials per dollar, and later briefly touched a historic high of nearly 1.47 million rials per dollar. This scale of depreciation meant that people's savings lost nearly half of their real value within a single year. For example, a middle-income household earning the equivalent of about $500 per month at the start of the year found that income worth only around $250 by year's end. As the currency collapsed, the prices of imported goods rose relentlessly. Food, medicine, and daily necessities became increasingly expensive. Imported wheat prices surged, pushing bread prices from about 100,000 rials per kilogram at the beginning of the year to over 150,000 rials per kilogram. By December, a rise of more than 50%. Compared to the same period the year before, the rial's depreciation worsened dramatically, with the total loss in value reaching as much as 84%. At the same time, officially reported inflation reached about 42.2% in December 2025, several percentage points higher than earlier in the year, and even peaked at 48.6% in October. Food prices rose by roughly 72% year over year, while medical supplies increased by about 50%. For instance, the price of chicken climbed from around 200,000 rials per kilogram early in the year to 350,000 rials by December. Many families were forced to reduce meat consumption and rely on cheaper grains instead. The rising cost of medicines, such as antibiotics, doubled treatment expenses for chronic patients, with some clinics reporting that patients simply stopped seeking care because they could no longer afford it. While the currency collapse pushed up import costs, inflation rapidly destroyed consumers' purchasing power. Unemployment rose to around 15% and exceeded 25% among young people. Many university graduates were unable to find stable jobs and were forced into low-paid temporary work. These worsening indicators were not just numbers. They represented the daily breakdown of countless households and ultimately ignited nationwide anger. By January 9, 2026, protests had entered their 12th day. Economic pressure continued to intensify, and the rial further weakened to around 1.445 million rials per dollar, triggering more strikes and demonstrations. The trigger market shutdowns and the first protests on December 28. This wave of protests did not appear overnight. It was the result of long-term, accumulated pressure finally breaking. On December 28, merchants at Tehran's famous Grand Bazaar and surrounding markets shut down their shops in protest. They were not reacting to abstract inflation figures or exchange rate statistics, but to a lived reality. When the rial collapses, costs rise and consumers lose purchasing power. Business becomes impossible. One fabric merchant explained that the cost of imported cotton yarn rose 60% within a year, while retail prices could only be raised slightly, resulting in monthly losses of over 5 million rials. Traditionally, bazaar merchants have been a key pillar of Iranian society. Their decision to shut down operations was like a flashing red warning light in the economy. Not silent endurance, but open resistance. The strike spread rapidly to nearby areas, with thousands of shops closing and daily market transactions falling by more than 90%. From there, the protests quickly crossed social boundaries. University students and ordinary citizens joined marches, chanting slogans demanding government intervention, price stabilization, and control of the collapsing currency. Some even called for political change. Demonstrations spread from Tehran to major cities such as Isfahan, Shiraz, and Mashhad. In Isfahan's university district, hundreds of students blocked campus gates to protest tuition hikes and doubled cafeteria prices. In Mashhad, retired workers joined the crowds, saying their pensions no longer covered basic medical expenses. By December 30th, protests had spread to more than 25 provinces, with participation estimated in the hundreds of thousands. Videos circulating on social media showed protesters burning tires and blocking roads. By January 9th, demonstrations had reached all 31 provinces, including remote regions such as Balochistan, with women and ethnic minorities increasingly involved, and the scale continuing to grow. A shift in emotion, where economic hardship meets political demands. While the protests initially focused on the rising cost of living and currency collapse, they soon evolved into broader political discontent as crowds grew and information spread. Slogans shifted from calls to stabilize the economy to open criticism of government policies, political structures, and national leadership. Chants such as "Iran first" and "Don't sacrifice our lives for foreign wars" appeared, reflecting public frustration over government spending priorities. Many protesters accused authorities of directing oil revenue toward regional allies, while domestic infrastructure deteriorated. In the summer of 2025, power shortages caused factory shutdowns in multiple regions, affecting millions of jobs. Corruption was repeatedly cited, particularly the economic influence of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps (IRGC), which protesters said distorted resource allocation and restricted access to credit for ordinary citizens. Direct criticism of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei also emerged. Slogans like "Death to the Dictator" and "Clerics must go" echoed across multiple cities. While reminiscent of the 2022 Masa Amini protests, this wave was more economically driven and drew broader participation, including merchant groups that traditionally supported the government. International observers noted that years of sanctions, combined with pressure from the United States and Israel, deepened economic isolation and fueled public anger. By January 9th, chants praising the former monarchy, such as "Javid Shah, long live the Shah," had appeared, with reports suggesting some security forces were beginning to defect. The state responds, repression and concessions at the same time. As protests spread, the government adopted a dual strategy. On one hand, senior officials acknowledged the economic strain and promised to listen to reasonable demands. Authorities pledged dialogue with representatives, efforts to stabilize the currency, and fiscal adjustments. President Masoud Pezeshkian called on the Interior Ministry to engage with protesters and announced a monthly grocery subsidy of about $7 per household, starting January 10th to ease pressure on low-income families. The central bank governor was also replaced, in an attempt to stabilize the rial through foreign exchange intervention. On the other hand, security forces took harsh measures in multiple cities. Riot police reportedly used tear gas to disperse crowds, and in some areas gunfire was reported. In Tehran alone, at least 17 people were killed and hundreds injured. Human rights organizations reported that by January 9th, at least 62 people had died, including 48 protesters, and 14 security personnel, and thousands had been arrested. Some were detained for injuries sustained during clashes, while others were accused of participating in violent actions. Beginning January 8th, the government imposed a nationwide internet shutdown, aimed at disrupting coordination and information flow. Social media usage reportedly dropped by 80%, but the move only intensified public anger. International outlets such as CNN and the BBC noted that, while these measures temporarily suppressed protests, they risked deepening long-term resentment. By January 9th, U.S. President Donald Trump warned that, if Iran killed more protesters, it would face very severe consequences. Why this protest wave has deeper impact. What sets these protests apart is their foundation in everyday economic reality rather than a single social incident. Inflation has remained high for years, making basic living costs unbearable. In 2025, food inflation reached 60–70%, forcing many families to raise food spending from 30% of monthly income to over 50%. The collapse of the rial wiped out household savings and disrupted market functions. The exchange rate jumped from 820,000 rials per dollar to nearly 1.47 million, erasing middle-class wealth almost overnight. Merchants, students, retirees, and ordinary families all joined the protests, creating cross-class and nationwide mobilization. Unlike earlier unrest limited to major cities, this movement spread to all 31 provinces, with more than 274 recorded protest events by January 9th, involving women and ethnic minorities, combined with long-standing frustration over sanctions, fiscal mismanagement, and policy failures. Many observers see this as the most extensive and intense protest movement since 2022, with potential long-term political consequences. Experts warn that without addressing root causes, such as the IRGC's economic dominance and foreign spending priorities, unrest could escalate into a deeper regime crisis. By January 9th, analysts describe the situation as reaching a point of no return, with possible implications for the broader Middle East. Conclusion: a break in everyday life. For ordinary Iranians, this movement is not about abstract statistics. It is about the reality that daily meals, grocery baskets, and monthly incomes no longer match expenses. A Tehran taxi driver explained that his daily earnings fell from the equivalent of $50 at the start of the year to $25, while fuel costs rose by 40%, leaving him with monthly losses. When a currency collapses to more than 1.4 million rials per dollar, it represents a sharp reversal in a person's lifetime purchasing power. This is not something a percentage figure can fully convey. It is a form of everyday bankruptcy, from a single market shutdown to millions taking to the streets. This is not just an economic event, but a deep social rupture. It shows that when the economic foundation collapses, social stability quickly follows. Iran's future now depends on whether its government can genuinely respond to public demands, rather than relying solely on repression. As of January 9th, protests were still ongoing, and the world was watching closely for what might come next.